All right, thanks, Tucker. And this is a Fox News alert. Major breaking news tonight on multiple fronts. The Mueller memos are out. Paul Manafort accused of lying to investigators. Michael Cohen will spend significant time in prison. And yet, bad news for the left. No evidence of any collusion, nothing. And what the left is claiming isn't true. We'll prove that in the course of our hour tonight. We've been saying this for months. Trump-Russia collusion has been, remains a hoax. We now have evidence. Meanwhile, disgraced former FBI Director James Comey testified today on Capitol Hill. He wants you to believe that FISA abuse never happened. We're going to show you how his shocking, indignant remarks are actually proven wrong. And we'll also tell you who does need to be prosecuted as soon as possible. It is now day 569 of the Mueller witch hunt. And yes, what we've been telling you about our two-tiered system of justice has never been worse. We start tonight, a lot of breaking news in our opening monologue. All right, we have major developments tonight from the Mueller witch hunt. Here's what you need to know. First, the special counsel's memo on Paul Manafort is out. It is heavily redacted. We do know, however, that Robert Mueller believes that Paul Manafort breached his plea deal and lied to investigators, all surrounding alleged crimes, none of which have anything to do with President Trump, none of which have to do with Russia or anything to do with collusion. Instead, a source with knowledge of the investigation tonight telling Fox News that much of the redacted information likely includes potential criminal allegations, we are told, against Tony Podesta. That would be John Podesta's brother, Democratic lobbyist. John Podesta, of course, the Clinton campaign chair. Absolutely nothing. Now, we're talking about in the Manafort case, tax evasion, other charges, bank loan applications dating back to 2007. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders issued this statement. It said, quote, the government's filing in Mr. Manafort's case says absolutely nothing about the president. It says even less about collusion. It is devoted almost entirely to lobbying related issues. And I'll add, long before Paul Manafort ever met Donald Trump. And also breaking today, two separate sentencing memos were filed against one-time Trump attorney Michael Cohen. First, the Southern District of New York completely rejecting Cohen's pleas for leniency, writing that, quote, a substantial term of imprisonment is warranted. Then the memo continues, Cohen's decision to plead guilty rather than seek a pardon for his manifold crimes does not make him a hero. In exchange for Cohen's guilty plea, the prosecutors recommended only a slight reduction to the suggested 5-year prison sentence. And meanwhile, the next memo from the special counsel, well, that focused on Cohen admitting that he lied under oath to the federal government, writing, quote, the sentence imposed should reflect the fact that lying to federal investigators, in fact, has real consequences. Let's be clear. The one thing that these two filings have in common, nothing to do with Russia or collusion at all. Zero evidence in any of these documents of Trump-Russia collusion, zero. Now, today, the president, he applauded the ruling. He tweeted, quote, totally clears the president. Thank you. And the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, called these findings, quote, complete exoneration of the president. They have nothing. We are very happy about it. And President and Giuliani, they're right about this. Legal scholar Alan Dershowitz, very passionate tonight, echoing a lot of these sentiments, including, by the way, saying, don't ever think about making a deal with Mueller because it's not going to work out too well for you. Take a look.
Right now, it does not sound like it's good news for Mueller. It doesn't sound like in Cohen they have found a witness that will give them the key to the kingdom. So far, the only solid evidence that he has provided is the campaign contribution issue, and it's a very, very weak case.
Oh, so tonight we have two men facing years behind bars. A third, George Papadopoulos, was released from prison today after serving his 12-day sentence for lying to Mueller's investigators. Meanwhile, we had earlier in the week American hero Michael Flynn. Well, he pled guilty to lying to investigators and will become a convicted felon, but only after his reputation and his finances were totally destroyed. And the question is, for what? When you read these documents, we hear about taxi medallions, fraudulent loan applications, tax evasion, lying about a potential project in Moscow that never got off the ground, and whether they stopped talking about it in January 2016 or June in 2016. Wow, the horror. How will America ever recover? Clearly, an election was stolen by all this information. after months of intense investigations, millions and millions and millions of your dollars spent, seedy perjury traps, legal coercion. We have absolutely no evidence of any wrongdoing by the President of the United States. And then you ask yourself this question: do you feel safer tonight? Do you feel safer that a low-level campaign volunteer, he spent his 12 days in jail for allegedly lying to the omnipotent Robert Mueller? Do you feel safer that an American military hero, Lieutenant General Flynn, that he had to sell his house to pay his legal bills? Oh, the thanks one gets for 33 years of service to his country, 5 of those years in combat. By the way, neither Comey, McCabe, Strzok, or anybody in the FBI thought he lied. But, of course, they put the screws to General Flynn, and he had to compose a lie about lying, and he did it to protect his family and to get out of the mess economically that they were putting him in. Do you feel any safer tonight that Michael Cohen is going to go to prison for a significant amount of time? Let's see, for lying to Congress, lying on a bank loan application, taxi medallion loans, not paying taxes? Do you feel safer knowing that Manafort might spend the rest of his life behind bars because of, again, tax fraud and lies on loan applications? Had nothing to do with Russia years before he met Trump? Do you feel safer that everyone surrounding the president is seemingly targeted and those on the left get away every single day scot-free? Is that the America we want to live in? Take, for example, fired FBI Director James Comey and what we learned this week about him. The Hill's John Solomon reporting we now have email chains that prove that Comey and others in Obama's DOJ, that they actually knowingly committed fraud on a FISA court, and they used Hillary Clinton's bought and paid for phony Russian dossier, the bulk of the evidence in their FISA applications, in their case to obtain a warrant to spy on a Trump campaign associate by the name of Carter Page. Well, they did all of this, we learned this week, knowing full well that the intel community did not trust the contents of Hillary's bought and paid Russian dossier. In other words, they knowingly committed fraud on the FISA courts. Not once, not twice, not 3, but 4 times. Where's that investigation into Jim Comey and Sally Yates and Rod Rosenstein and everybody else that signed on to those FISA applications, giving judges fraudulent, unverified, uncorroborated Russian lies, not telling the judges that it was directly paid for by the opposition party candidate to spy on an opposition party? So today, Comey testified behind closed doors on Capitol Hill. His attorneys allegedly ran cover for him and prevented him from answering any tough questions. And during a subsequent press conference, arrogantly, he's brushing off any charges that his FISA court conduct was wrong and illegal and disgusting. But I want you to think of this. Remember, he's the guy that signed on to that first warrant. That was in October of 2016. But that means he had to verify it was true. That meant he verified it. That means he corroborated it. That means he's standing behind it. But yet in January at Trump Tower, he told Donald Trump, then president-elect, that it was salacious and unverified. Watch this.
I have total confidence that the FISA process was followed and that the entire case was handled in a thoughtful, responsible way by DOJ and the FBI. I think the notion that FISA was abused here is nonsense.
Not even Christopher Steele believes his own dossier, and he's still defending it. The bulk of information used to get warrants to spy on Americans. Is that a little more important tonight? I would think it is. We all know the dossier was and is a debunked lie. Comey never verified it. Nobody verified it. Nobody corroborated Steele's so-called evidence. Steele himself wouldn't stand by it when questioned under oath in an interrogatory down in Great Britain, even after it was used to obtain a FISA warrant, even when he said it was salacious and unproven months after they had the FISA warrant in place. And James Comey, I guess he'll sleep well tonight knowing that our two-tier justice system will likely never hold him accountable. So too will these liars. People that lied under oath, well, Michael Cohen's in trouble tonight because of it. What about Cheryl Mills or Uma Abedin or Bruce Orr or Glenn Simpson, Christopher Steele, James Clapper, John Brennan, Andrew McCabe, Lois Lerner, Loretta Lynch, Eric Holder? Yeah, all those lied to authorities. They were never prosecuted, never even investigated in many cases. And let's not forget about James Comey. Remember, he lied to Congress under oath, but I doubt he'll get the Cohen treatment tonight. And then you have the king and queen of corruption, Bill and Hillary Clinton, from mishandling top secret classified information, obstructing justice, what? Deleting subpoenaed emails, acid washing hard drives with bleach pit, busting up Hammers devices, phones and Blackberries, leveraging their political positions in order to rake in millions of dollars. The Clintons tonight are perhaps this country's most corrupt politicians, and they have never, ever, ever been held accountable. But that might be about to change. John Solomon, breaking news right here on this program last night. Federal authorities received whistleblower information in 2017 alleging that the Clinton Foundation of a whole bunch of wrongdoing. Congressman Mark Meadows has confirmed that the whistleblowers have, in fact, turned over hundreds of foundation documents to lawmakers and potentially now shedding light into the Clintons' cloud of corruption. We're talking about information surrounding quid pro quo promises made to big donors while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State and the commingling of funds with the foundation and the Clintons' private money, and so much more, including one glaring example when Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, remember this deal, signed off on sending 20% of our uranium, the foundational material for nuclear weapons, to Vladimir Putin. And by the way, this occurred as the Clinton Foundation was receiving millions and millions of dollars from the chairman of Uranium One and all the banks involved. Now think about this. We knew that Putin had an operatives inside the United States. William Campbell was a spy within that network, identifying bribery, extortion, kickbacks, and money laundering. And guess what? Robert Mueller was the FBI director. And in the end, Putin not only got the foothold into our uranium market, the deal happened, and none of those people got in trouble. But the Clintons got their money. They got the kickback to the foundation in terms of millions and millions of dollars. So tonight, an investigation we now know, as of yesterday, is ongoing. And I've said over and over, it is time in America, if we care about our constitutional republic, that we end a two-tier justice system, that we have equal application of our laws and equal justice under the law. And now we do have more good news. A federal judge just today agrees with me. Judge Royce Lamberth, who's overseeing Judicial Watch's Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that involves Hillary's secret server email saga. Well, he dropped a major bombshell this week about just how far the government is willing to go to skirt transparency laws, writing, quote, "At best, the state's attempt to pass off its deficient search as legally adequate during settlement negotiations was negligence born out of incompetence. At worst, career employees in the state and justice departments colluded to scuttle public scrutiny of Clinton, skirt FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and hoodwink this court." And he didn't stop there, calling the Clinton email affair, quote, "one of the gravest modern offenses to government transparency." This judge has now ordered additional fact-finding in the case, but this is massive news, and we'll continue to keep you updated. All right, here to go through all of the day's news, Fox News contributor and, of course, investigative reporter Sarah Carter, the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Russia Hoax, The Illicit Scheme to Clear Hillary Clinton, Frame Donald Trump, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. The one thing as I read through this, we got a lot of interesting things here. We got a lot of really big sins, like, and by the way, don't lie on a loan application. And if you owe the taxes, pay the taxes. That's my advice. Because obviously you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And when you read these things, you say, okay, people did wrong things here. But none of it, not one bit of it, Greg Jarrett, has to do with Trump, Russia, and collusion. And it seems that the media is only fixated on one thing, and that was Michael Cohen's payment as it relates to Stormy and Karen McDougal, as somehow we now have a campaign finance violation. Well, I've got a whole list of them here of Obama and a bunch of other people that committed them too.
And they're civil penalties. They're not criminal cases. Why? Because to prove a criminal case of campaign violation, you have to prove that the candidate knowingly violated the campaign election laws, and prosecutors rarely are able to prove that because most people in America, candidates especially, don't even understand the incredibly complex laws. There's two things we learned from these memos today. One, in all three of them, there is no reference to Trump-Russia collusion to win the election. And the other thing we learned is that people like Manafort are refusing to tell Bob Mueller what Mueller wants to hear. In other words, if you don't abide by this Russian hoax, then we're going to throw the book at you and come after you with a vengeance.
You know, Sarah, people say, well, why do you compare all the things with the Clintons? Because we know she violated the Espionage Act. It is the single biggest slam dunk case on obstruction of justice. We know that Comey and Strzok wrote an exoneration before they ever investigated. Then Strzok wanted and expected Hillary to win $100 million to zero. Then it gets into, well, they exonerate her for crimes we know they commit. She then pays for a dossier that actually had real Russian lies in there that were spread to the American people. But also, what we learned this week in John Solomon's column is that, in fact, the FISA courts, the FBI, and all those people that signed those FISA warrants, they knew that they probably were false. They did it anyway. That is a fraud on the court.
That's absolutely right, Sean. What we have learned over the last nearly 2 years of investigations, both John Solomon and I, as well as congressional investigations, is one thing, that the special counsel was appointed to investigate a non-crime. There was no crime there. And what was out there was actual crimes and potential crimes over the last 2 years that have unraveled from Uranium One and the testimony given by William Campbell about the dealings both with Clinton and the Clinton Foundation, and now the stories that have come out that John has put out there that are incredible, that there's hundreds of pages of documents that a whistleblower has turned over to Congress, several whistleblowers. We also know that General Flynn, incredibly, did not lie to the FBI agents. That came out of Comey's own mouth. Yet for some reason, Mueller was able to twist his arm and get him to admit to one count of lying so that he could drag this honorable man, this hero, through the ringer and, take away his ability to defend himself publicly. What we need now, though, is a special counsel, a second special counsel to investigate this. And this is coming from lawmakers on the Hill, from attorneys who have been very well read on this issue. Whether William Barr, whether he gets nominated, becomes the new attorney general, whether he will appoint a second special counsel is vitally important now, because the American people deserve to know the truth, and the people who violated the laws, including the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, when they violated both the FBI and the DOJ to get that warrant on Carter Page, need to be held accountable, and it needs to be investigated.
But this is the thing, Greg, we talk about Uranium One. William Campbell we had a spy inside of Putin's network, okay?
Sure.
We still allowed, even though we knew, he's reporting back bribery, kickbacks, money laundering, and all sorts of other crimes to the FBI.
Right.
They don't act. The deal actually goes through with Hillary's permission. Money from people involved gets sent back to the foundation. That's Russia. Russia got our uranium. Okay, nobody seems to care.
And the Clinton Foundation got $145 million from Russian sources related to that company.
Serious money.
And Bill Clinton got $500,000.
Then we got the dossier.
Right.
Bought and paid for Russian lies, and it looks like James Comey is the only person on earth that believes that two hookers were urinating on Donald Trump's bed in the Ritz in Moscow.
Right.
Okay, Steele doesn't even believe it, but Comey apparently does based on some of his words today. So you go through this, we've got loan application lies, we've got taxes that weren't paid, we've got campaign finance violations, process crimes like lying to the FBI. But yet we have real Russian lies that the other candidate paid for. Nobody cares about that. Why? How is that possible?
If there was any collusion, it was Hillary Clinton who paid for Russian information, fed it to the FBI and the Department of Justice to damage Donald Trump. And the FBI and DOJ ran with that. They used this phony dossier, and they knew it was fabricated, and the new emails that we'll get when they're declassified.
Well, how many laws are broken when you lie to why do I think if I was stupid enough to lie to a judge?
6 felonies.
You couldn't get me out of jail, and you're a pretty good lawyer.
One of them's abuse of power, obstruction of justice, perjury, the list goes on and on. When you deceive a court and conceal evidence, you're lying to them. You're perpetrating a fraud. The Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, John Roberts, is in charge of the FISA court. He should order the presiding judge to hold a show cause contempt hearing.
He's too busy hating on Trump, too, I guess. So
bring
doesn't he
James
appoint all 11
Comey and
FISA
Sally
court
Yates
judges?
and Andrew McCabe and Rod Rosenstein before that court to say, explain yourselves.
But we knew part of this. What John's Blockbuster this week showed, we knew the part that they never told the FISA court that, in fact, Hillary paid for this document. They said it might have a political taint to it. That was as far as they went in a footnote.
In a footnote.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we know that our intel community had real problems with the dossier. Turns out Christopher Steele, in the end, wouldn't even stand by it.
Right.
So they go before a FISA court not once, not twice, not three, 4 times, Sarah. And
That's right.
They're using information that they didn't verify or corroborate. Not only that they suspected was false from the beginning. Why?
Absolutely.
For Russian lies.
Absolutely. And another problem that the intel community has, Sean, and you know this based on stories we wrote over a year ago, was the fact that they were unmasking Americans. And when are they going to investigate who unmasked General Michael Flynn, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, in those documents to the Washington Post? I mean, that's one of the most egregious violations in the intelligence community, is when you unmask an American's name. And we all believe we know where that came from. And it came from leakers within the government that wanted to push this type of collusion story forward, a false narrative. There wasn't even just that. Remember, over the 300 unmaskings that Samantha Powers was involved in, and all the other unmaskings, and the weaponization of the intelligence community. These are egregious acts that basically violated the foundation of our Constitution and what we stand on principle. So
let me
the only
focus in on
thing we
this.
can do...
One of the first articles you and John co-authored together had to do with surveillance, unmasking, the lack of minimization, and the leaking of raw intelligence. That is a crime that happened to General Flynn. That's where the perjury trap. They had the whole conversation, and they bring him in. He's like, he didn't even know he was being really interviewed. He thought he was being informed getting into his new position, so he didn't remember it perfectly. The FBI didn't think he's lying, but he's going bankrupt. He has to sell his house. They're threatening his kid or his family or somebody. And I'm wondering, what was the increase in surveillance? Wasn't it some 300% in 2016?
Yes, it was over a certain amount of years. And then the Obama administration themselves had to come forward to the courts and admit that they were doing this. And then they secretly tried to bury it. But let's remember this, that when the FBI agents interviewed General Flynn, they went back and they notified the FBI, including Comey and Andrew McCabe, that Flynn did not lie at all. In fact, he gave them information that he didn't even know they knew. So he was even more than forthcoming with them. So the American public really has to think about what happened here and what can happen to them if something like this happens again, because it shouldn't be allowed to happen again, and people should be held accountable.
All right, I want to go to a legal question for you, Greg. And by the way, I have it right here. Oh, Obama 2008 campaign fined $375,000 by the FEC for campaign violations reporting. Okay. But the one thing out of all of this, because they can't tie Donald Trump to the taxi medallion issue or the loan application issue or the fact that some people didn't pay all their taxes and were hiding income from the government through various, I guess, banking methods. So the media are saying, well, Michael Cohen paid this money to buy the silence of these women, therefore it's a campaign donation or violation. And because it was on his behalf, and remember, Michael said he did it on his own originally. I think he changed his story, but on his own, not telling Donald Trump what he was doing, and then was paid back. Is there any law that was broken there?
No. First of all, Donald Trump used his own money, and under the law, you're allowed an unlimited amount of your own money to your campaign. And second of all, in addition to that, you know, you're also able to skirt the campaign laws as a crime because you didn't knowingly break the law. And, you know, if Michael Cohen was filing faulty paperwork, that's what he did, not Donald Trump.
If the president, so Michael changed the story. Originally, I think he said, January of 2016, Trump, Moscow, the tower they stopped any discussions of it. It never happened in the end. But then he said, no, it was actually June. So it went on longer than he originally said. Let's say he did continue. Let's say they built Trump Tower, Moscow. Is there any illegality in any of that?
It's perfectly legal. Look, anybody can develop real estate in Russia or anywhere else. And this guy, you know, the President of the United States was a real estate developer. He backed out of the deal. He had a letter of intent, and then he said, sorry, I'm not going to exercise this. There's no evidence of any collusion with Russia that pertained to the election. There's no secret bank account, no secret conveyance, no rendezvous in Moscow, none of that. And yet the media and liberals claim collusion.
Don't lie in your loan applications. Pay your taxes. And if Robert Mueller offers you a deal, don't trust him. Because didn't get Michael Cohen a whole lot, did it? And there's not equal justice under the law. That we learned.
Yeah, you should never trust Robert Mueller. If you get a subpoena, as I told somebody recently who got a subpoena, don't talk to Robert Mueller. Go immediately to a lawyer. And this is an individual who got a subpoena who knows nothing about any of this. But that's what Mueller is doing.
Go straight to jail. That's what it seems like. All right, guys, good to see you. Greg and Sarah. All right, joining us now live with a report is our Washington Fox News chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge. She, like us, is, by the way, I read every bit of this today, and I was like, ready to fall asleep.
Well, there was a lot to go through, and just to recap, Sean, for folks at home, we had 2 filings late today out of New York State, one from the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and the other for the special counsel recommending significant jail time, about 4 years and a $500,000 fine for Michael Cohen. There's one section that's getting a lot of attention tonight about Cohen and what he offered the special counsel on Russia, and it reads in part, Cohen provided the SCO, that's the acronym or the short form for the Special Counsel Office, with useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters core to its investigation that he obtained by virtue of his regular contact with company executives during the campaign. Cohen provided relevant and useful information concerning his contacts with persons connected to the White House during the 2017-2018 time period. But the filings don't explain more about the nature of those contacts. It's also important to note that the U.S. Attorney filing is very dramatic in the way that it's written. And it reads in part, while many Americans who desired a particular outcome to the election knocked on doors, toiled at phone banks, or found any number of other legal ways to make their voices heard, Cohen sought to influence the election from the shadows. He did so by orchestrating secret and illegal payments to silence 2 women who otherwise would have made public their alleged extramarital affairs with individual 1, who is then candidate Trump. Here in Washington, we also had a filing late today on the president's former campaign chairman. One of the documents was filed under seal, which means it is not public. The other was released publicly, but as you can see here, it's heavily redacted. And it makes the case that the lying Manafort is guilty of in the plea deal actually relates to his contacts with the White House, with the administration. It doesn't go to the issue of Russian coordination or collusion, Sean.
What about there's one report, I've not been able to confirm it, anything involving any people connected to, say, John Podesta?
Right. My colleague John Roberts was able to get some information this evening that the section that is sealed in the Manafort filing here in Washington has to do with Tony Podesta. Tony Podesta was doing lobbying work with Paul Manafort with the Ukraine. I also understand from the reporting earlier this week of the Associated Press that the special counsel has been looking at Greg Craig, a former White House counsel under the Obama administration. Correct me if I'm wrong on that designation. But the bottom line is it does appear the special counsel is looking at Democrats and what's called a violation of FARA, which is the Foreign Agents Registration Act. A lot of people have been asking whether the special counsel was going to apply the laws equally in this case. We at least see perhaps some indications that they're looking at Democrats. And if I could just finally on James Comey, because this was a big story today, but kind of got buried in the avalanche of filings late in the day. And Comey, as you know, was on Capitol Hill for this closed-door transcribed interview under oath for 6 hours. This is an extraordinary situation where an FBI director is brought back to the Hill, put under oath for a transcribed interview because the lawmakers, in effect, they're on the Republican side, really don't trust him. I mean, I don't know if there's an easier way to say it, but they didn't trust him enough. They wanted that transcribed interview. After the session, he got a number of questions which frankly seemed to me like softball questions and didn't really go to the issue of the Clinton emails and the disparate handling of that case opposed to other federal prosecutions, and then also the Russia case. And let's just take my question I got to him on whether there was evidence that there was FISA abuse or the misuse of the surveillance process during the 2016 election.
I have total confidence that the FISA process was followed and that the entire case was handled in a thoughtful, responsible way by DOJ and the FBI. I think the notion that FISA was abused here is nonsense.
The question was about whether he had total confidence in the dossier and its use to secure that surveillance warrant. And as you know, Sean, by the time he briefed the incoming president in January of 2017, that dossier was still unverified at that time, so that's 3 months after the initial application. The great thing about the deal that was brokered today between Comey's lawyers and the lawmakers on Capitol Hill is that this transcript is going to be made public, and this will allow individuals to test the statements that they heard today from Director Comey, that he answered the questions, that there was really nothing about Russia, only the emails, and that there was no problem with the FISA or the surveillance warrant process. And it will also allow us to test the statements of Republicans that a government lawyer really ran a lot of interference and shut down critical lines of questioning, Sean.
You know, so much here, though. I mean, if you look, Catherine, remember Christopher Steele in that interrogatory, he wouldn't stand by his own dossier. So if it was as the Nunes and as the Grassley-Graham memos say, the bulk of information in the FISA applications came from that dossier and its own author doesn't stand by it, then one has to question if this email chain does exist, as John Solomon reported this week, that said directly that James Comey's name was on it. Did they verify it, and when? And what did they verify? What part of it was wrong? And if it was the bulk of information, was a fraud committed on the court? Also, one other question. Why didn't they tell the court, the FISA judges, that, in fact, Hillary had bought and paid for that FISA warrant when it was just a mere footnote in the FISA application? So
we're going to get a lot of good stuff, I think, in that transcript. We'll see what questions were avoided and whether there were legitimate reasons. Right? That was the plan, but I think there could be a little bit of foot dragging. There was a Justice Department lawyer in there, a government lawyer, and there may be issues about redactions, and both sides will want to be clear that the transcript is accurate, right, before it goes out. Well, but there's going to be a lot of good stuff. You can test what everybody said today and see if that really was an accurate portrayal of what went down inside that closed-door session.
All right, thanks for taking us inside. Catherine Herridge in Washington tonight. Thank you. Joining us now with reaction, former Clinton pollster, advisor Mark Penn, California Congressman Darrell Issa, Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. Good to see you all. Congressman Issa, you were in there. Hopefully we'll get the transcript tomorrow. I just went over the problems with these FISA applications. Is it true the bulk of information came from the dossier that Christopher Steele doesn't even stand by?
That's exactly right, that it not only came from the dossier, but as you know, Christopher Steele hasn't been in Russia in 20 years, so even the people, the unknown people responsible for it, could easily have in fact been agents of the Russian government, which would mean that Hillary Clinton is the one guilty of the so-called collusion.
Well, that's a great irony there. You have been very critical, Mark Penn, of this process from the get-go here, as you should be. I believe if we have a dual justice system, I'm looking at taxi medallions, I'm looking at loan applications, I'm looking at tax violations. I'm not seeing any collusion here at all. This has gone so far. But I do see issues with Russia with Uranium One. And that is that we had a spy within that network. And we did have a lot of money kicked back in the end. Then I do see issues with this dossier because it's full of Russian lies. And the FBI used it as the basis of the FISA applications. And in fact, they never verified it. What James Comey just said is false because we know they didn't verify it because Steele doesn't stand by it.
Well, I typically urge all Americans to read the dossier because anyone who actually reads the dossier understands that it's a joke document. It's a document filled with, nonsense that couldn't possibly be true, that almost reads like an April Fool's joke. And now that we've spent, I don't know, $30 million, investigated almost everyone in the campaign and the administration, there's still no evidence of anything that one would call collusion, and certainly not related to the individual case. If anything, we're drifting more and more back to Monica Lewinsky days by talking about payments to Stormy Daniels and trying to take payments that are clearly not, campaign related under the definitions that have been ruled by the FEC, and try to turn those into crimes that you associate the president with. It's that whole creep of the special counsel to get the president all over again.
And Tammy, it seems that Greg Jarrett explained it very well in terms of the law. And I watched the hysteria on TV, and they're saying campaign finance violations. Well, I've got campaign violations from '96 over here, and from 2008 over here, and from Bob Dole over here, and from Al Gore over here, and the biggest fine paid by Obama. My question to you is, as you look at where this has now gone, I mean, I feel bad for the men involved in the things that happened, but I feel that they're victims of what is selective prosecution and a political witch hunt that they got caught up in by no other reason that they like Donald Trump.
Well, look, this is why we're nervous when there's more regulations and more laws, because we pretty much wake up in the morning as Americans and we're breaking some kind of a law, but then it's selective about how it gets applied, but it's always kind of hovering over you. This entire dynamic, ranging from the dossier to what Catherine Herridge described about their writing and the filing that they just did, is fan fiction. And we're talking about criminal justice reform on one hand from the Trump administration, of course, and the American people see this fraud, this hoax being unleashed upon people in Washington, but we experience it also at the local level in our daily lives, whether it's the disenfranchised or people of color. This is a very chilling event. Americans recognize it. They do not like it, and it's up to the president to make sure this dynamic remains clear to the American people about what's happening to them.
He can still release the applications, the Gang of Eight information, the 302s, and the email chain. Do you believe, last question, Darrell Issa, we just had comments from James Comey. Do you believe what he said about the FISA warrants was accurate, or did he lie?
Well, he's certainly inaccurate. The idea that these things were anything other than falsely granted based on deceiving a federal judge is more laughable than what Mark said about the dossier itself. Ultimately, this dossier is what got them into a business of looking for a crime that didn't happen.
Unbelievable. All right, thank you all. Yeah, appreciate it. When we come back, Congressman Mark Meadows revealed today, well, what did he reveal that should have the Clintons very worried tonight? Doug Schoen, Larry Elder will examine that as this busy news night continues. We're glad you're with us. All right, so the left in America loves to focus on the Mueller probe and phony Russia collusion. The Clintons, they always seem to get it passed, don't they? But maybe that's finally changing. Congressman Mark Meadows confirms that the Clinton Foundation whistleblowers have turned over what is hundreds and hundreds of documents that may shed a light on what is a criminal pay-for-play scheme. As John Solomon first reported here last night, federal authorities received whistleblower evidence in 2017, 6,000 pages, alleging Clinton Foundation wrongdoing. Here now with reaction, former Clinton pollster Doug Schoen, radio talk show host Larry Elder is with us. You're friends with the Clintons at one point, Doug Schoen. They do. Listen, you got to give it to them. They do seem to skate every single time.
Well, and my position is, if you're going to finish, as I think we should, the Mueller investigation, why wouldn't we want balance and to look at the issues that have been now credibly raised? I mean, I'm not passing judgment on anything, Sean.
So you agree Uranium One is troublesome to you? Uranium One is troublesome? The phony Clinton bought and paid for dossier that Christopher Steele doesn't stand by, which became the basis for FISA warrant applications, those bother you?
Yeah, they do. I mean, look, I've read the dossier. That it was
ridiculous,
put together by the Clinton campaign, paying millions of dollars for it, and used as a basis for FISA warrants is a troubling thing to me. That
troubling?
I think. Well, it is.
The guy that wrote it doesn't stand by it. Our FBI. We now learned this week in John Solomon's investigative report, Larry Elder, Not only that, our own intelligence community had questions, but they still used it as the basis and bulk of information to obtain a warrant to spy on a Trump campaign associate. Now, those are Russian paid-for lies. I thought we were worried about Russian interference, and take it a step further, those lies were disseminated to the American people to cause them to vote against Donald Trump.
Well, that's right, and it's becoming increasingly obvious, isn't it, Sean, that this whole investigation started with this bogus dossier. And I'd like to point out people are defending the Mueller probe by arguing, well, he's gotten about 8 or 9 convictions so far. Well, if the definition of a good special counsel probe is how many convictions you get, then the Clinton Whitewater probe was a home run, a grand slam. They got 14 convictions, including the then sitting governor of Arkansas. And those convictions, Sean, had to do with the underlying purpose of the investigation, which was an alleged crooked real estate deal. These convictions that Mueller has gotten so far has nothing whatever to do with collusion or conspiracy or coordination by Donald Trump. So it's a whole thing
Let me
has
ask
been
you a legal
weaponized.